The drill went into the wall of the explosives magazine at Quarry 6 at 11 minutes past 10 in the morning, and everybody inside that concrete room heard it start. It came through the wall as a sound with no edges, not a bang. A grinding, a chewing, a steady bone-deep worrying at 16 inches of reinforced concrete, and dust sifting down from a spot at chest height on the north wall like flour through a sieve. 9 people were in that room. There had been 11 at first light, when the gravel detail rolled through the quarry gate to load out for the road, and the 2 who were no longer counted were out in the sun on the far side of the crusher, and nobody in the magazine talked about that. Master Sergeant Roy Latimer put his palm flat on the wall and felt the machine working on the other side of it. 9, he said. Everybody hear me, 9 of us. That's the number, that's all the number's going to be. He said it into the room, and then he said it into the handset, because saying it out loud was the only work he had. The steel door was blocked. They had heard the machine come up and heard it park, and one of them had gotten an eye to the crack and seen a track-mounted rock drill sitting nose in against the door frame, 20 tons of it, a boom the size of a telephone pole braced against the wall, and a 3-inch bit turning. Whoever was running it knew exactly what he was doing. He was drilling a ring, holes in a circle, and when the circle was finished, you knocked the middle out with a hammer, and you had a window, and once you had a window, you did not need a door. 14 miles east, at the airfield at Camp Harlow, a woman was sitting on an ammunition crate in the shade of a Connex with her boots off, sorting brass into a coffee can. When the siren cut the morning in half and every man on that flight line started running, she did not look up at the sky like the rest of them, and she did not ask what had happened. She put her boots back on. She laced them. Then she stood up and looked at Warren Pike across the counter of his shop and said, "Warren, what's still in the rack?" Pike would think about that afterwards more than he thought about anything else that day. Not the shot. That question. If you're still here with me, do me a favor and subscribe, and put in the comments what city you're listening from, because I read every one of them. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one. There's a moment coming where a woman nobody on that airfield could have picked out of a lineup puts a single round through a propped engine panel at 940 meters, and 9 miles away, her own husband hears a diesel go quiet over the radio and understands in about 4 seconds exactly who he married. Her name was Nora Calder. 11 months before, it had been Nora Ryland. The high desert she came from was a different high desert than the one she was standing in, but it lied the same way. In eastern Oregon, the ground ran flat and blue-gray out to a rim of hills and made you think you could see how far away things were, and you could not. Her mother had a sheep outfit out there, 1,100 acres of sage and rock and a well that had never once been good, and Verna Ryland had taught her daughter to shoot the way other people teach a kid to drive, because it was going to be necessary and because doing it badly made a mess somebody had to clean up. The summer Nora was 19, the pump on the stock well seized in the middle of July. She remembered standing in the pit with her mother while the sun came straight down on the back of their necks, and 140 ewes stood at a dry trough 2 miles away doing arithmetic they could not do. Verna had the pump head apart on a feed sack. She had her reading glasses pushed up in her hair and greased to the elbow, and she was not hurrying, which at 19 had felt like a kind of cruelty. "Get me the little wrench and stop dancing," her mother said. "They're going to start walking to the creek. Then they'll walk to the creek." Verna held up a bearing, looked through the middle of it like a monocle, and set it aside. "Nora, everything you break out here, you're the one that fixes it. Nearest parts counter is 90 miles, and it's closed Sundays. So when it comes time, you have to break something. And it comes, you break the cheap part, not the block, not the shaft. Break the cheap part and drive home." That was the same summer the coyotes found the lambing ground, and Verna handed her the old .270 off the rack by the kitchen door and taught her the rest of it out of the same book. 1 round. Know the ground behind the animal. Never make an animal work harder than it has to, and never make yourself extra work either. Wind comes up that draw every afternoon at 4 whether you believe in it or not, so believe in it. And when Nora, at 21, told her mother she'd signed the papers, Verna set down her coffee and said the thing she never took back. "I taught you that so you could keep things alive." There was a photograph on Nora's phone she looked at more than she looked at anything else on it, and it was not of her mother, and it was not of her husband. It was a bend in Rock Creek with a cottonwood leaning over it, taken on a disposable camera in the 90s, and the reason she had it was a boy named Owen, who was not a boy anymore. Owen was her sister Janet's kid, 19, working the counter at a tire shop in Burns, saving for a welding program in Bend. And when he was 11, Nora had promised to take him out to that bend in the creek in August and camp there 2 nights because she had gone there at his age and it had done something for her she could not put into a sentence. She had promised him for August of 1 year and been in a schoolhouse in Georgia. She had promised him for the August after that and been in a plywood hut at an airfield with a name he couldn't pronounce. Last year, she had promised him in April, meant it in April, and canceled in July. His answer had come back in under a minute. No worries. 2 words, lowercase, no punctuation, and she had sat with her thumb over the screen for 11 minutes and not been able to think of one honest thing to type. That was the part she could not tell anybody. Not that she'd broken it 3 times, that he had stopped being disappointed. That somewhere in the last 4 years, a 19-year-old had quietly rebuilt his understanding of the world so that it no longer included an aunt who showed up, and that he'd done it without complaining, and that the no worries was not a forgiveness, it was a permanent adjustment, and she had been the one who made it necessary. She could go home and shoot a coyote at 600 yards in a crosswind. She could not answer a text message. The task force at Camp Harlow existed to make root copper into a road, and the group out on the plateau existed to make sure it never was one. And between those 2 facts sat about 400 people, 26 vehicles, a gravel contract, and Sergeant First Class Nora Calder, whose paperwork said she was there as a range and ammunition safety NCO attached to the engineer element, which was true. She was quiet. That was the whole file, as far as most of them read it. She did not talk in the chow line. She did not talk at the morning stand-up unless there was a number she owned. She had a way of standing in a room and letting it go on around her that men who filled rooms found insulting, and the man who filled the most room at Camp Harlow was Roy Latimer. "Here's what I don't understand," Latimer said one evening, loud in the maintenance bay with maybe 14 people in earshot, and Nora 8 feet away with a clipboard. 22 people in this element, and I know something about all of them. Ochoa's got a boat he can't afford. Brantley won't shut up about his fantasy team. And then there's the quiet one over there. He gestured at her with a wrench, the way you'd point at furniture. Nothing. 11 months. You ever wonder why somebody's got nothing to say? A pause for the room. It's usually because there's nothing in there. Somebody laughed and immediately wished he hadn't. Nora finished the line she was writing, clicked the pen, and said, "Your air compressor's leaking at the tank fitting, Master Sergeant. It's why it cycles all night." Then she walked out, and Latimer stood there with a wrench in his hand. Warren Pike had been a civilian contractor on airfields like that one for 22 years and had run the arms room at 4 of them. He was 59, with a Kansas voice and reading glasses on a lanyard, and he did not care about anybody's rank. In the back of his rack, under a canvas, was a Mark 13 in .300 Winchester Magnum that had come in with an element that had gone home 8 months before, and nobody on the manifest was qualified on it. So it sat there, and Pike wiped it down on Sundays like a car nobody drove. Nora asked him one afternoon if she could function check it since it was on his books, and nobody had touched it since March, and he said sure, and then he stood there and watched her handle it and forgot what he'd been doing. There was no ceremony in it. She broke it open, ran a rod through it, and looked at the bore against the light in about the time it took him to find his glasses. She set the scope's turrets against a torque driver by feel and confirmed by tool. She sorted a case of match ammunition by lot number and set 2 boxes aside from the rest without explaining why. And she wrote a card in pencil, ranges down the left, corrections down the right, and taped it inside the buttstock cover. "You want to shoot it?" Pike said. "Range is open Thursday. Nobody uses it. If it's no trouble." It wasn't. She went out Thursday with a wind meter and a notebook and came back at dusk, and Pike, who logged everything because that was his job, wrote her name and the round count and the distances in the book, and the last entry in the row said 1200, and he looked at it and shrugged and closed the book. She was not always quiet. That was the thing that surprised people who got past the first week of her. In the maintenance tent, on the days it got past 115, and nobody could work metal without gloves, Sergeant First Class Tom Calder, 38, motor sergeant, married to her since the previous September in a courthouse in Killeen with 2 witnesses off the street, had a swamp cooler he'd built out of a fan, a footlocker, and a scavenged pump, and it worked for 6 days and then died. "It's the pump," Tom said. "It's not the pump. Nora, I'm the mechanic." "You're the mechanic," she agreed, sitting on an upturned bucket with a Coke, and let the silence sit there just long enough. "It's the float. You've got it hung up on the wire, and it's telling your pump there's no water in a footlocker full of water, and I've watched you look at that pump for 20 minutes like it owes you rent." Ochoa put his face in his hands. Brantley made a noise like a kettle. Tom crouched down, looked at the float, flicked it with one finger, and the pump came on, and the whole tent lost its mind, and Nora took a long pull off the Coke and said, "Anyway, I'm going to go be quiet somewhere." And they laughed her all the way out the door, and that was the first time Latimer, who was standing at the far bench, had nothing to say and had to swallow it. 8 days before the quarry, she rode out on the gravel run to Quarry 6 for a magazine inspection because the mining company's old explosives store was still on somebody's list, and somebody's list was hers. The quarry's drill operator was a local man named Sammy, who had been running that same track drill for 9 years and had opinions about it. It was parked in the shade of the crusher with its side engine panel propped open on a length of rebar and a hose running over the top of it, and steam coming off in the noon light. "Every day at this hour," Sammy said. "Every day. The fan cannot do it. 6,200 feet, and you are asking her for 300 horses, and the dust is inside all of these little—" He made a raking motion with his fingers. "So I wash her, and I put the door open, and she is happy again." "How long does she run before she gets unhappy?" "On the rock? An hour, maybe less if there is no wind." He grinned at her. "You know machines?" "I know one well," Nora said. "I married it." Sammy laughed so hard he had to put a hand on the track, and Nora stood there in the shade with her hand on the warm sheet metal of that machine and looked at the propped panel and at the stacked cores behind it, the charge cooler in front, the radiator behind, all of it wet and thin, and $40 of copper and aluminum bolted onto $300,000 of machine, and she thought about a pit in Oregon and a bearing held up like a monocle, and then she went and did her inspection. She also looked at the magazine. 16-inch walls poured in 1974, rebar on 8-inch centers. One door. "Nothing gets in there," said the young engineer with her, admiring it. "Nothing gets out either," she said. "The ambush happened at 0640 on a Tuesday on the quarry floor, before the sun had cleared the east rim, and it did not come to Camp Harlow as a radio call in the small hours. It came as a silence. The gravel detail checked in at the gate and then did not check in at the first load and did not answer, and the operations tent went from 4 people to 20 in 90 seconds, and then Latimer's voice came up on the net flat and too fast, and everybody in the tent stopped moving. "Copper Main, this is Copper 6. We are in the magazine at the quarry. We are 9. Repeat, we are 9, and I have 2 outside I cannot get to." A burst of static. Something hitting metal, far from the microphone. "They've got the high ground on both rims and they've got the road behind us. I need everything you've got, and I need it now." Lieutenant Colonel Alan Beckett was 44 years old and had been in command for 6 months, and he stood in front of a map with his hands behind his back while every option he had died in front of him. Rotary wing was 90 minutes out, 1 bird in phase, 1 committed to a casualty run south. Fixed wing could be overhead in 25 and could do nothing because the militia were standing on top of the magazine and leaning against its walls, and anything with a warhead in it would kill the 9 it was meant to save. The ground relief column would take an hour and a half on a road that had been mined for 6 weeks by the exact people they'd be driving toward. Then, at 10:11, the drilling started, and Latimer told them what it was. "Say again your last," Beckett said. "It's their own rock drill, the quarries. They've got it hard against the north wall, and they are cutting a ring, sir. They are going to open a hole in the wall and drop something through it." A pause, and when Latimer came back, his voice had a crack down the middle of it. I have got 9 people in a concrete box and I cannot get out the door because that machine is parked across it. How long? 40 minutes, maybe an hour if he hits steel. Nobody in the operations tent said anything for 4 full seconds. Then Warren Pike, who was standing in the back with a clipboard because he'd brought the ammunition figures over and had not been dismissed, said in his flat Kansas voice, "You want that machine stopped, not blown up. Stopped." Beckett turned around. "I want anything." "Then you want Calder," Pike said. "The quiet one. Ammo, NCO." He held up the clipboard as if it explained anything. "She's been shooting the 13 off my books on Thursdays. Out to 1200. It's in the log. She's an observer." "That's what it says," Pike agreed. Beckett sent for her, and she came in with her sleeves down and her notebook in her cargo pocket and stood in front of the map, and Beckett looked at her and made himself say it in front of 11 people. "Sergeant, I've had you at the bottom of every list I've made since I got here, and I made those lists off one page of a file, and I never once asked you a question. I'm asking now. Can you get on that quarry and stop that machine without killing my people inside that wall?" "I need the rifle from Mr. Pike's rack. Both boxes of the Mod 1 I set aside, my wind meter, and a vehicle to the culvert at kilometer 11, Nora said. "And I need someone on the net who knows that drill's engine better than I do." "That's the whole answer?" "That's the whole answer, sir." 4 minutes later, riding out the wire in the back of a truck with the rifle across her knees, she keyed the handset for the first time. "Copper Main, Barrow. Departing. En route the culvert, then dismounted. I'll be on this net the whole way. Tell Copper 6 I heard him and the number's still 9. Ochoa, driving, looked in his mirror at the woman in the back and did not recognize the voice at all. The truck got as far as the culvert at kilometer 11, and no further, because there was a mound of fresh gravel across the road with tire tracks that stopped short of it and turned around, and everybody in that vehicle understood what that meant. Nora was out of the back before it stopped rolling. 3 clicks, Ochoa said. "It's 104 already." "Then I'd better go now." She slung the rifle, took the ammunition, checked the wind meter's lanyard on her chest, and looked at him. "Reuben, back this thing up half a kilometer and get it off the road behind that spoil pile. If they've mined in front of you, they've thought about behind you." She went into the wadi at a walk, because you do not run at that altitude in that heat and arrive as anything but a liability, and she gave herself a cadence and kept it. The wadi floor was fine gray dust that took her boot to the ankle and gave it back grudgingly. Salt crusted at the corners of her mouth inside 400 meters. Her heart went up and stayed up, and she kept her breathing on a count of 4, and every time her mind went toward the drilling, she put it back on the count. 38 minutes later, she came up the reverse slope of the quarry's north rim on her belly and got her first look, and what she saw took the plan she had made in the truck and threw it away. The quarry was a stepped bowl, 3 benches cut into the plateau, gray and white and orange in the noon glare, with the crusher and the conveyor on the east side, and the old magazine tucked under the north face like a tooth in a jaw. The rock drill was there, exactly where Latimer said it was, nose in against the magazine, boom braced, and she could see the dust coming off the bit in little sneezes. She could see the cab. She could see the man in it. She could see the operator's back and shoulders through the glass. She could not see the engine. From the north rim, she was looking at the drill's front left quarter. The engine bay was on the far side, and the far side was hidden by 20 tons of machine and by the magazine wall itself. From here she had the cab and only the cab. "Copper Main, Barrow. I'm on the north rim, 900 and change to the drill. I have the operator. I do not have the machine." Beckett came back immediately. "Take the operator." "Negative, sir, and here's why." She was already sliding backward off the crest, dust in her teeth. "You've got a dozen men down there. If I take the man out of that seat, another man sits down in it inside 2 minutes, and now they know exactly which rim I'm on, and I've spent everything I have to buy you 2 minutes. The seat isn't the problem, the machine is the problem. I have to be able to see the machine. Where do you have to be?" She was already looking at it. Across the bowl, on the west side, a spur of rock ran out from the plateau like a knuckle over the third bench. From the tip of that spur, she would be looking straight down the drill's open side. Between her and that spur was 600 meters of bare open ground with nothing on it taller than her boot. "The west spur," she said. The barrow. I'm moving. She went at 1,042 and got 210 meters across before the first round came in. It went past her head as a crack and a sound like tearing canvas, and the second one hit the ground 11 feet to her left and threw grit into the side of her face, and there was one shallow scrape in that whole flat, a runoff cut maybe 14 inches deep, and she was in it before her mind had finished the sentence about it. She lay in 14 inches of shade with her cheek in the dirt and her arms in tight and her heels flat, and she made herself go absolutely still. The ground under her was hot enough to feel through her front. Her pulse was in her eyeball. Somewhere above and behind her, a machine gun opened up on the cut and walked its rounds along the lip, and the noise of the rounds hitting rock was a bright chipping sound like a mason working. And the noise of the gun itself arrived a half-beat late from the far rim, flat, unhurried. Dust drifted down onto the back of her neck and stuck there in the sweat. A grasshopper landed on her wrist and stayed. She counted her own breaths and did not raise her head, because the only thing worse than being pinned was being seen well. They did not know where she was. They knew where she had been. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and it is measured entirely in whether you can lie still. 11 minutes. The gun fired in bursts of 8 and then 12 and then 8 and then a longer gap and then nothing. And in the nothing she heard the drill again, and that was the sound that made her want to move, and she did not. At 14 minutes she went over the far lip of the cut in one motion, downhill into dead ground, and did not stop for 400 meters. She was in the shale on the flank of the spur, working up through broken rock, when she heard the voices. Two men, coming down the same seam she was going up, talking to each other in a normal conversational tone, one of them laughing. She had maybe a second and a half. She went flat under a shelf of undercut rock with a bush growing out of the crack, pulled her knees in and put her forearm across the rifle so the glass wouldn't take the sun. They came past close enough that she could hear the gravel move under their boots and hear one of them breathing through his nose. One stopped. He was standing at a distance from her face she could have measured with her arm. She could smell cigarettes and sweat and gun oil, and she watched a piece of shale rock under his heel and settle, and she thought, quite clearly and out of nowhere, of the way Tom put his boots by the door at home in a specific order, left then right, and how she had never once mentioned that she noticed. Her whole body wanted air. Her body was a bellows begging her. She gave it a fraction of a breath through her open mouth, slow, no sound, and held. The man said something to the other one. The other one answered. Then he moved off downhill, and the shale went with him, ticking away into the quiet, and Nora lay under that rock for a slow count of 60 after she could no longer hear anything, and then she moved. At 11:03, she keyed the handset to check the clock on the wall. Copper 6, Barrow. Give me a time on the drill. Nothing. Copper 6, Barrow. Say your status. The net hissed. She lay on her side against the slope with her chest heaving and listened to a channel with nobody on it. Beckett came up, called him, got nothing. Called him again. Somewhere behind her, a truck engine ran and then shut off. She looked at the second hand on her watch and watched it go around one full time and then most of another, and the thought she kept having was not, is he dead? It was, how far through the wall is it now? And she made herself stop having it, and it came back anyway, and under the whole thing was a picture of 9 people in a room watching a circle of holes get closer to being a circle. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, 3 minutes. At 3 minutes 10, a click, and then, Latimer, hoarse, farther from the microphone than before. Copper main 6. Sorry, we had to go to the back wall. He came through the first inch, and we took the antenna off getting the mast down. A breath. Still 9. We're still 9. Wall's about a third. Nora put her forehead down on her wrist for exactly 1 second. Then she got up and kept climbing. She found Emmett Hale in the wash at the base of the spur at 11:19, and she nearly stepped on him. He was one of the 2 Latimer had counted as outside. He had run in the first 30 seconds and had made it 900 meters and had gone down in a runoff channel behind a slab of caliche, and he had been there since 0644 with a tourniquet he'd put on himself and his rifle laid across his lap, facing the way he'd come, doing the only thing left to him, which was waiting. His eyes tracked her before his head did. He tried to say something and produced no sound at all and licked his lips and got it out on the second try. "You real?" "I'm real." She was already down beside him with her hands moving. "Sergeant Hale?" "Emmett." He blinked slowly. "Everybody says Hale." The clock in her head said the wall was a third gone and the spur was another 200 meters up, and she had one round to build a position for and a wind that was coming up harder every 10 minutes. 12 minutes to do this properly, maybe 14. She could go up now. He would probably still be here in an hour. Probably. She got the tourniquet loosened and reset it higher and cranked it down while he swore steadily and quietly at the sky. And she got a fresh dressing on and cut the leg of his trousers away and got the hasty one off him. She dug the salt tabs and the water out of her own kit and made him drink a half-liter in slow mouthfuls, timing him, taking it away when he grabbed for it. She stripped a spare shirt out of her ruck and rigged it over the caliche as shade with 2 rocks and a bootlace. She checked the pulse in his foot with 2 fingers and held them there for 15 full seconds because it was worth being sure. Her hands, which had been doing nothing but crawling and gripping and dragging for 2 hours, were suddenly doing very small, careful things at the end of her arms, a knot, a fold, a strip of tape torn to a width, and her breathing went down to nothing while she did it. "Ma'am," Hale said, "am I going to live?" She did not tell him it was going to be fine. She looked up at him. "You've got a good pulse in that foot, your color's coming back, and you've been talking to me for 6 minutes without repeating yourself," she said. "That's 3 facts. People with those 3 facts do not die in ditches. You're going home." He laughed once, which cost him. "Home," he said. "You know what I was doing 3 weeks before I got on the plane? Rock wall, front of my mom's place, outside Pueblo, dry stack, no mortar, all fieldstone off our own ground." He rolled his head toward her. 3 summers. It's about half. She's got the other half of it sitting in a pile she has to mow around, and every time I come home she says one word about it. One. Just, "Emmett." That's it. That's the whole conversation. "How long's it take to finish?" 2 months of Saturdays. Then you've got 2 months of Saturdays. She put her canteen in his hand and closed his fingers on it. "I'm going up that spur. I'm going to be about 900 meters that way, and I am not going anywhere until every person from this quarry is out of it, including you. When people come for you, they'll come from the east and they'll say my name first so you don't shoot them." "What is your name?" "Calder." At 11:41, prone on the tip of the barrow with the rifle bedded on its bipod and her ruck under the butt, Nora Calder heard the man who had called her furniture say her name into a radio in front of everyone he knew. The silence before it lasted 9 seconds. She counted them because there was nothing else to do with them. The net was open and everybody on that plateau was on it. The operations tent, the relief column, the aviation element 90 minutes out, Pike standing in the back with his clipboard, and Tom Calder wiping his hands on a rag in the door of the maintenance tent with his head tilted. "Copper Main, this is Copper 6. Latimer's voice, and something had come apart in it. "I'm told there's a shooter on the west side. I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want Sergeant Calder, Nora Calder. Is she the one on the west side?" 6, Main. Affirmative. Another gap, shorter. "Sergeant Calder, this is Roy Latimer." Every syllable of it costing him something the whole net could hear. "There is a bit turning 9 inches from my back. He's got the ring more than half cut. I've got 9 people in here, and there is nobody else. I'm asking you to shoot at a machine that is touching the wall we are standing behind. I'm asking you by name because I want it on this net that I asked for you." A breath that scraped. "Whatever you need from me, say it, and it's yours." In the operations tent, Beckett looked at the floor. In the maintenance tent, Tom stopped wiping his hands. Nora keyed the handset. "Copper 6, Barrow. I heard you. Keep everyone off that north wall and get low. I need 6 minutes." The spur was hot enough that she had to get her elbows onto her ruck strap to keep them off the rock. She built the position the way she had been building positions since she was 19. Bipod loaded, heels flat, cheek finding the same place on the stock it always found. The rifle pointed where her body already pointed, so she wasn't muscling it. She ranged the drill 3 times and averaged it, 941 meters. She ranged the top of the magazine, the crusher, and a fence post on the second bench, so she'd have something to check the wind against, and she put the wind meter out at arm's length on a rock and read her own air. And then she looked at the way the bowl was shaped and thought about a draw in Oregon that came alive at 4 in the afternoon every day of her life, whether she believed in it or not. The quarry breathed. Hot air came off the pit floor and climbed the west face and pulled the surface wind up the bowl behind it. And at the tip of the barrow she had a clean 9 to 11 miles an hour quartering across her from the left, and down in the pit it would be less and it would be turning. The bullet would spend its first 400 meters in her air, and that was the air that mattered most, and she was in it. And the drill's engine door was propped open on a length of rebar, exactly as it had been 8 days ago at noon, because the man who was running it now was doing what everybody who ran that machine in that country did in the middle of the day. "Copper main barrow. Get me whoever knows that rock's power pack." Tom Calder's voice came up on the net 12 seconds later, and hearing it in her ear on the top of that rock did something to her sternum she did not have time for. "Barrow, this is Copper Maintenance. Go ahead." She made her voice flat. "Copper Maintenance, describe the cooling stack on that machine front to back and tell me the exact order." A pause. "Say again?" "Front to back. What's the first wet thing behind that side door and what's behind that?" Grill, then the charge air cooler, then the radiator, then the fan and the shroud, and the hydraulic oil cooler is stacked on the left of the whole thing. It's all one package about 30 inches tall." His voice changed as he got into it because it was his, and that was the thing about Tom. "It's a 300-horse Deutz. Why?" "Density altitude here is about 8,800 and it's 106 on that floor. If that engine loses its coolant while it's under full load on rock, how long until it stops?" 10 seconds of nothing. 90 seconds to derate, Tom said slowly. "It'll pull back power on its own and you'll hear it fall off. Full shutdown inside 2 minutes, 2.5. She's already running at the top of the gauge in that heat. That's why the door's propped." "Will it come back?" "Come back? Will it start and drive under its own power after it cools? Yes or no?" Another pause, and in the operations tent, 20 people watched Tom Calder's face over the video feed and did not understand what they were watching, and Warren Pike did and took his glasses off. "Yes," Tom said. "If all you take is the cooling and it shuts itself down before it cooks the head, it'll sit and cool for 30-40 minutes, and then it'll fire and it'll move. It'll be angry, it'll steam, it'll run hot as hell, but it'll move. 30 feet, it'll move. That's what I needed. Barrow," he stopped, started. "Barrow, that door is propped maybe 10 inches at the bottom and 30 at the top, and it's angled. From the west you'd be shooting through a gap into a box. There's a frame rail in front of the bottom third of it." "I know," Nora said. "Copper 6, Copper Main. Listen, I am not going to kill that machine. If I kill it, it stops where it is, and where it is across your only door. And there is nothing on this plateau that can drag 20 tons off that door before dark. So I am going to take the cheap part. I'm going to open the cooling. It will not stop right away. Nobody is to key this net and tell me I missed. It will keep drilling for a minute and a half, and then it will get quiet, and then it will get very quiet. And that's when it's done. Copper 6. When it's dead, you are going to sit in that room for half an hour and let it cool while I hold this rim, and then Copper Maintenance is going to talk one of you into that cab, and you are going to drive it off your own door. Acknowledge." There was a silence on that net of a quality nobody there had heard before. 6 acknowledges, Latimer said. "God help us. 9, Barrow. It's 9. She built her firing solution in pencil on the card taped inside the buttstock cover, and then she put the pencil away and put both hands on the rifle. 8.1 mils of elevation, 1.4 left, and she watched the wind for 90 seconds before she committed to that number, watching the mirage boil in the bottom third of her glass. feeling the pressure change on the left side of her face as the bowl inhaled, timing the lulls. And there was a rhythm to it, a slow swell and drop, and she picked the trough. Her heart was at 120 from the climb, and she needed it under 90. She lay there and let it come down. Sweat ran off her eyebrow into the scope's eye cup, and she blinked it out. The bit ground on, a rasp with a hitch in it, and she thought about 9 people standing against a back wall listening to it get louder. Through the glass, at 941 meters, the drill's open side door was a bright shape, and behind it, in shadow, the stack, a rectangle of dark honeycomb, maybe 2 feet by 2.5 of visible core, cut across its bottom third by the frame rail. Her window was the top 2/3. Call it 16 inches of usable height. 16 inches at 941 meters is a target about the size of a dinner plate seen from 400 yards. And there was a crosswind, and she had 1 round she could take before the whole quarry knew where she was. She thought about her mother in a pump pit holding a bearing up to the light like a monocle. Break the cheap part and drive home. The wind swelled and she waited. It dropped and she waited. It came back and she waited, and on the 4th cycle it went slack and stayed slack for 3 full seconds. And in the second of those 3 seconds, Nora Calder pressed the trigger straight back, and the rifle went off against her shoulder, and the whole bowl of the quarry threw the sound around for a long time. Nothing happened. The drill kept turning. The dust kept sneezing off the bit. Through the glass she watched a man come out from behind the crusher and look up at the rim she was not on, and another man start running, and the engine ran on exactly as before, and it kept running while she cycled the bolt and reloaded, and while the machine gun on the north rim opened up and began working the ground 400 meters short of her. 6, Barrow. Do not key this net. 20 seconds. 30. The bit ground on. In the magazine, Roy Latimer stood with his hand on the north wall and his eyes shut and his lips moving, and the vibration came up his arm just as it had for 2 hours. At 55 seconds, the note of the engine changed. It was not dramatic. It sagged. It went from a hard, even roar to something rounder and more tired, and the bit's rasp slowed and hunted, and the boom trembled against the wall. At 1 minute 20, it began to hunt badly, surging and dropping, and Nora watched a white plume come up out of the propped door and stand in the still air over the machine like a flag. At 1 minute 52, the engine of that rock drill shut itself off, and the loudest thing in Quarry 6 was a man in a cab hammering the start button with his fist while a fan wound down. Then even that stopped, and 9 people in a concrete room heard the wall go quiet. Copper Main, Barrow. Her voice on the net was so level it was almost boring. Machines off. Cooling stack is open. Engine has shut down on thermal. No fire. Structure is intact. I am in position on the west spur and I will hold. Recommend you start the birds in the column now, and recommend nobody on that floor tries to run yet because they've got a gun on the north rim and it's still working. Barrow out. She let go of the rifle with her right hand. Her hand shook so badly she could not have written her own name with it, and she put it flat on the hot rock and left it there and watched it and waited for it to stop, and it took a while. In the operations tent, nobody said anything for 6 seconds. Then a specialist near the radios sat down hard on a footlocker with his hand over his mouth. Beckett wrote the time on a legal pad and then wrote it again because the first one wasn't legible. In the maintenance tent 14 miles east, Tom Calder stood in the doorway holding a rag and did the arithmetic he had been doing since he first said 90 seconds to derate and got the same answer he'd been getting and put his hand on the doorframe. "Boss," Brantley said, "isn't that your—" "Yeah," Tom said. Roy Latimer went out through the door at 1338 after 31 minutes of sitting in a hot concrete room counting the same 9 people over and over, and Tom Calder talked him into the cab from 14 miles away. "2 red rocker switches on your left, both up. Push the button and hold it. Don't pump it. She's going to sound like she hates you. Let her." She sounded like she hated him. She sounded like a bucket of chains, and she blew steam out of the propped door in a column. And Latimer, who had never driven anything with tracks in his life, put his hands on 2 levers and moved 20 tons off the door of that magazine at a walking pace with a machine gun working the ground behind him, and took a round through the meat of his side halfway through and finished anyway, and by the time he fell out of the cab, the door was clear, and 8 people were coming out of it, and Nora Calder was on the west spur making the north rim keep its head down. She held that rim for 4 hours and 11 minutes. She held it while the relief column came up the road with a roller out front. She held it while the birds came in, one at a time, onto the second bench with their rotors 10 feet off a rock face, and she held it while a medic she never met knelt in a runoff channel over Emmett Hale and said her name first so he wouldn't shoot them. She held it while every living person from Quarry 6 went out to the east, and when they asked her to come down to the last bird, she said no. Because the militia had come around the south end of the bowl by then, and the ground between the barrow and the pit was covered, and putting a helicopter on that spur meant putting a helicopter in front of a gun for 90 seconds so that one person didn't have to walk. Barrow, this is Maine. Confirm you are declining the lift. Maine, Barrow. I'll come out the back of this ridge and cross the flat to the junction at Copper and the Quarry Road. 9 clicks. I'll be there between midnight and 2. Do not send anybody onto this ridge to find me. They'll come the wrong way, and I'll be gone. She waited until the last rotor noise had faded east. Then she broke her position down, buried the brass, drank the last of her water, and went off the back of the barrow in the last of the light, alone, on a route nobody knew she was taking. The walk took her 7 hours. The playa was flat and pale, and it held the day's heat like a stove long after dark. And then around midnight it let it go all at once, and the sky came out from horizon to horizon with more stars in it than any sky over any city, and Nora Calder walked 9 kilometers under it with a rifle on her shoulder and her mind doing whatever it wanted, which was mostly Rock Creek and a cottonwood, and a boy typing no worries with his thumbs. At 01:48, she came up onto the hardball at the junction and saw a wrecker parked with its running lights on, and a man sitting on the back bumper with a thermos. Tom didn't get up. He poured a cup and held it out, and she took it and sat down next to him on the bumper, and they sat there in the dark on the edge of a road in a country neither of them was from. "Chicken noodle," he said. "You're a good man." "I'm the best man." He looked out at the dark. "You want to talk about it?" "No." "Okay." They drank the soup. Off in the east, something was burning down to nothing on the plateau and putting a smudge across the low stars. "For what it's worth," Tom said, "you were right about the float." Nora put her head on his shoulder and did not say anything for a very long time. Major Paul Denning arrived from the higher headquarters 4 days later with a folder and a list of questions because a soldier had fired 1 round at a piece of civilian mining equipment with 9 friendly personnel 11 feet behind it, and that generates paperwork the way a fire generates smoke. He was not a bad man. He was a thorough one, which is worse. Sergeant Calder. He had the folder squared with the edge of the table. "Your file says Range and Ammunition Safety NCO attached engineer element. It lists no special qualifications, no badge, no course, no additional skill identifier of any interest at all. Do you dispute the file?" "No, sir." "So, walk me through it. You engaged a target at 941 meters through an aperture you've described as roughly 16 inches of usable height in a 9 to 11 mile crosswind at 8,800 feet density altitude with a rifle you'd first handled 6 weeks earlier, 1 round. He looked up. "Sergeant, I've been an investigating officer for 4 years. When a soldier does something the file says they can't do, one of 2 things is true. Either the file's wrong or the story is." "Yes, sir." "That's not a defense." "It wasn't offered as one." Denning sat back. "Then help me." Warren Pike was in the room because Nora had asked for him. He'd been sitting with his hands folded, and now he leaned forward and put his range log on the table and opened it with 1 finger. "Every round out of my rack, every distance, every date, going back to March," Pike said. "Thursdays. Look at the right-hand column." He pushed it across. "Nobody made her do that. There's no requirement in the world that says the ammo NCO goes and shoots 1,200 meters on her day off. She just did it every week and wrote it in my book, and I signed it, because that's my job, and nobody in this task force ever opened it, including me." Denning read the column. He turned a page and read that one, too. "There's also the card," Nora said. She reached into her breast pocket and put it on the table. A strip of index card, sweat-warped, ranges in pencil down the left, corrections down the right. the last 3 entries updated in different lead. I wrote that in March off the range and corrected it twice for the season. Everything I used at that quarry was on that card before anybody was in trouble. And this? Denning tapped the folder. You never corrected the file. No, sir. Why? And Nora Calder, who was quiet, said, because when I married Sergeant Calder in September, I took his name, and my record before that is under Ryland. And when the transfer clerk asked me if there was anything else I wanted moved over, I said no. Denning looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a laptop over and typed for a while, and something came up on the screen, and he read it again from the top, and he took a breath and let it out through his nose. Ryland, Nora J., he said. Marksmanship Unit. 2 years as an instructor. 4 years on a precision element attached to a joint task force. 3 deployments. He scrolled. There's a commendation in here with a citation I'm not going to read out loud in this room. No, sir, please don't. You reclassed voluntarily at 11 years service. He looked up over the screen. Sergeant, nobody does that. I did. Why? The room was quiet, and the swamp cooler at the far end of it rattled, and the light through the plastic window was the color of weak tea. Because for 4 years, I was the answer to the worst day of somebody's life about once a month, Nora said, and I was very good at it, and I got to where I could feel myself waiting for the phone. Sir, I didn't quit because I was afraid of the work. I quit because I wasn't. Denning closed the laptop. He sat there with his hand on top of it. I'm going to write in this report that the record was accurate and the reader was lazy, he said. That includes me. I read 1 page. Everybody does, sir. That's not an excuse either, Denning said, and stood and put out his hand and shook hers. They sat on 2 pallets behind the maintenance tent at 1:30 in the morning, 6 days after, with the generator thumping 40 feet away and the whole airfield down to the red lights. You knew that machine, Tom said. I stood next to it 8 days before. Sammy had the door propped and the hose over it, and he told me it runs an hour on rock in that heat before she gets unhappy. I put my hand on the sheet metal. She was looking at the ground between her boots. I didn't file that away because I'm clever. I filed it because I've been filing things like that away since I was 19, and I don't know how to stop. That's not the part I'm asking about. I know it isn't. The generator ran. Somebody's radio played 4 bars of something and shut off. 11 months, Tom said. Not angry. That was the thing that made it unbearable. He wasn't angry. I've told you every stupid thing that's ever happened to me. I told you about my dad. I told you about Fort Riley and the transmission and the $1,800. And you sat there and let me explain to you how a rifle works, Nora. Twice. 3 times. 3 times. You were very patient, she said, and her mouth did something that was trying to be a smile and failed halfway across, and then her face came apart. She had not cried at the quarry, and she had not cried on the playa, and she had not cried in front of Denning, and she cried now, on a pallet behind a maintenance tent, with her hands over her face and her elbows on her knees, and it came out of her in ugly, airless pieces. And Tom put his hand flat between her shoulder blades and left it there and didn't say anything at all for 2 solid minutes. I liked it, she said finally, into her hands. That's the thing. That's the thing I've never said to one living person. Everybody wants to hear it wrecked me. It didn't wreck me. I was calm. I was the calmest person in every room I was ever in, and I was glad they called me. I was glad, Tom. And then I'd come home and stand in a grocery store and think, none of you know that there's a person for this, and it's me. Her breath hitched. And I thought if I ever told you that out loud, you'd look at me like what? Like the thing, she said. Not the person, the thing they call. Tom took a long time with it. He was a man who took a long time with things, which was one of about 9 reasons she had married him. You didn't hide it from me, he said. Nora, look at me. You didn't hide it from me, because I've known you were something since the swamp cooler, and every single guy in that tent knows it. We just didn't know what. You hid it from you. He shook his head slowly. You took my name so it'd be somebody else's record. You went out on Pike's Range every Thursday, alone, for 6 months, and you never once told your own husband you'd been out shooting. That's not a woman hiding from her husband. That's a woman going out behind the barn to be who she is. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. I told myself I'd tell you when it stopped being true, she said. Yeah, well, Tom said, it's never going to stop being true. So how about you just tell me, and then we'll have supper. She called her mother on the morale line at 4 in the afternoon, which was 6 in the morning in Oregon, because that was when Verna Ryland would be at the kitchen table with the first cup and not the second. You're all over the news out here, her mother said. Not you, but somebody. They said an incident. Janet called me at 11 o'clock at night to ask if I'd heard anything, and I said no, and then I sat up until 4. I'm all right, Mom. I know you are. You called. A cup went down on a table 2 continents away. So what is it? What's what? Nora Jean, said Verna, you have called me on your birthday and Christmas for 4 years. It is the middle of a Tuesday. So she told her, not the quarry. The other thing. She told her about a text message and no worries, and about 3 Augusts, and about the 11 minutes with her thumb over the screen, and her mother listened the way she'd always listened, which is to say she made no sound at all until the very end, and you had to trust she was there. You want me to tell you you're forgiven? Verna said. No. Good, because I can't. That's not mine to hand out. A chair creaked. Sit down and listen to me for a minute, because I'm the only one who's going to say this to you. You think that boy is angry. He's not angry. He's not angry, that's right. He's arranged. Her mother's voice was as flat and unsentimental as a fence post. He has gone and rearranged his whole idea of the world so it doesn't have you in it in August, and he did it real quiet, and that's a thing a person only has to do a few times before they get good at it, and once they're good at it, they do it with everybody. That's what you're actually looking at. Not a ruined trip, a boy learning to expect less. And Nora, I'm going to tell you something because you're not a child. He learned it from watching me do it to your father for 22 years, so don't you sit there thinking you invented it. Nora sat in a plywood booth with her hand over her eyes. So what do I do? You quit promising him a trip. Mom, you quit promising a trip, Verna said, because a trip is a thing you can lose to weather and orders and God, and you have lost it to all 3. Give him a date. A date is a smaller thing, and it's the only part you actually own. You call that boy up, and you say, Owen, the 7th of August, I'm going to be standing in the driveway at 6 in the morning. Then on the 6th of August, you get yourself into that driveway if you have to walk. And you do not say one single word about being sorry, because sorry is you asking him for something, and he has done enough for you. Silence on the line. $3,000 a minute of silence. Okay, Nora said. You taught me that so I could keep things alive, she added, before she could stop herself. That's what you said to me, in the kitchen. Her mother didn't answer that. Her mother said, you call him today, not tomorrow. And then, after a while, in a different voice, I'm glad you're all right. Nora called Owen that night. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding like somebody who never got calls. August 7th, she said. 6 in the morning, your mom's driveway. Bring a sleeping bag. I'll bring everything else. That's a date, not a plan. There was a pause on the other end of the world. Yeah, Owen said, and then, carefully, the way you touch something to see if it's hot? Yeah, okay, yeah. Roy Latimer came out of surgery at the Roll 2, went to the hospital at the big base, and was flown back to Camp Harlow 11 days later with a drain in his side and orders to sit down, which he ignored. Before he ever said one word to her, he did 2 things. He went to Paul Denning and gave a sworn statement, unprompted, in which he described in detail the several occasions on which he had publicly disparaged a soldier in front of her peers, stated that he had blocked her name off a personnel recommendation the previous February, and said that if the task force's read of Sergeant Calder had been wrong, it was wrong primarily because he had been loud about it, and no one had contradicted him. That statement went into an official record with his name on it, and it was not going to do him any favors for the rest of his career, and nobody asked him for it. and he drove 4 hours to the airfield at the big base with a drain in his side to hand-carry Warren Pike's original range log to the reviewing authority, because Pike had said he didn't trust it to the mail. Then, 8 days after that, at dusk, he came and found her behind the maintenance tent where she cleaned the rifle on Thursdays. Sergeant called her. She kept her hands moving. Master Sergeant. He stood there a while. He was a loud man in a silence he'd made himself, and it was clearly the worst place he'd ever been. I've been writing this in my head for 3 weeks, and every version's garbage. He rubbed the back of his neck. I called you furniture in front of my mechanics. I want to say I was... No, I'm not going to explain it, because the explanation's the insult again with a hat on. He stopped, started over. I decided who you were off nothing, off you being quiet. And then I stood in a concrete box and had to say your name out loud and ask you for my life and the lives of 8 people, and I heard myself say it, and I knew, right in that second, in front of everybody, exactly what kind of man I'd been. She'd set the bolt down. She was looking at him. There's no version of this where I get to feel better, Latimer said, so I'm not asking for that. I just wanted it said to your face instead of on a radio. Nora let it sit for a second and a half. It's said, she said. He nodded once, and his jaw worked, and he walked off into the dark, and neither of them ever mentioned it again for as long as they knew each other, which turned out to be a long time. The letter from Loretta Hale came 17 days after the quarry, addressed in blue ballpoint to Sergeant Calder, Camp Harlow, with a return address in Pueblo, Colorado, and it had obviously been to 2 wrong places first. Dear Mrs. Calder, it started, and there was not one military word in the whole of it. My son says a woman came down into a ditch and told him he was not going to die and that he believed her. He says you gave him your water. He says he does not remember much of the rest of it, but he remembers you telling him 3 things about himself and that they were all true, and that he has been telling everybody in the hospital about it, and they are sick of him. I have been trying for 2 weeks to write you, and I cannot get it right, so I am going to just say it plain. I have had that boy for 27 years. His father did not stay. There has never been one single day of my life since he was born that I have not thought about him, and I do not think that is unusual for a mother. But I think people forget it is the same for every single one of us. He is the whole thing. He is not a part of it. He is the whole thing. So I do not know how to thank you, and I am not going to try because I would need better words than I have got. I will only say that I am 61 years old, and I have never once in my life owed anybody anything I could not pay, and now I do, and it does not feel bad. It feels like being rich. If you ever come through Colorado, you are going to sit at my table. I am not asking. Nora read it standing up in the mail tent and then went and sat in the cab of a parked truck for 40 minutes with the letter on her knee and the door shut. She had no idea what to do with it. She had a whole professional vocabulary for people trying to kill her and not one word for a 61-year-old woman in Colorado saying it feels like being rich. She read it 4 times. Then she wrote back, and it took her 3 nights, and what she finally sent was 6 sentences long, and she thought it was terrible, and Loretta Hale kept it in a kitchen drawer for the rest of her life. The formation was in Hangar 2 at the end of the month, 1100 hours, because the awards had come down from the higher headquarters, and because Beckett had decided it would be read in front of everybody and not handed over in an office. There were about 200 people in that hangar, and most of them were bored. The heat came in off the ramp in sheets. Somebody's phone buzzed in a cargo pocket. Beckett read the first 2 awards, and they were the ordinary ones, and men clapped politely and thought about lunch. Then he read the 3rd one, and the first change in that room happened in the 2nd row, on the face of a 22-year-old specialist named Brantley, who had spent 11 months calling her ma'am and holding doors for her the way you do for somebody's wife, and who now stood there with his mouth slightly open as the citation described the movement across 600 meters of open ground, and the 11 minutes in a 14-inch scrape, and the treatment of a casualty in a wash under observation, and then said the distance out loud. 941 meters. The change went through those 200 people like weather moving over ground. You could watch it go. It hit the engineer element first, and then the maintenance section, and then the aviation guys along the back wall who had been leaning on things and now were not leaning on things. Then Beckett got to the part about prior service and read out the name Ryland and the unit and the years and the 2-year instructor tour and the phrase precision element attached, and the hangar stopped making any sound whatsoever. 200 people, a corrugated roof, no wind. The loudest thing in that building was Beckett's paper. Warren Pike, standing at the end of the second row with his glasses in his hand, was crying without any expression at all on his face, the way men of that generation do it, and did not wipe his eyes because that would have been admitting to it. Ruben Ochoa stared at the floor and thought about a woman getting out of the back of his truck into 104 degrees, saying back it up behind that spoil pile, and he could not lift his head. Tom Calder, in the front rank because Beckett had put him there on purpose, looked at his wife across 11 feet of concrete and had to look away and then looked back. And Roy Latimer, standing in the third row with a drain scar under his shirt and a career he had voluntarily damaged in a folder in Kansas, put his hands at his sides, and stood up out of his slouch into the straightest position of attention that man had held since he was 19 years old, and it hurt him physically, and he did not move a muscle for the rest of it. Beckett set the citation down. "There's one more thing, and then we're done," he said. "This task force decided who Sergeant Calder was in about 4 days, and I want to be specific about how we did it because you're all going to do it again to somebody. We decided it off a single line of a personnel file and the fact that she doesn't talk much. I signed that judgment. When I got here, I looked at one page and I put her at the bottom of every list. And I want you to understand that if she had been what I thought she was, on the 22nd of this month, there would be 9 people dead in a concrete room 14 miles from here." He looked out at them. "She's not attached to the engineer element anymore. Effective this morning, she's the task force marksmanship and precision advisor, she reports to me, and she goes to the planning table on every operation from now until I leave. And if any of you have a problem with that, come see me and I'll walk you out to the quarry and show you the wall." Nora barely moved through any of it. She stood there with her hands at her sides and her eyes level, and when they clapped, she let them, and afterwards she went outside and stood in the shade of the hangar and breathed for a minute before anybody found her. Warren Pike found her. He handed her a bottle of water and stood next to her, looking out at the ramp for a while, and when he said it like a man reading a gauge. 22 years I've been handing rifles across a counter, he said. You get so you can tell in about 4 seconds. Most people pick one up like it's a thing that does something for them. He screwed the cap on his own bottle. You know what struck me that first Thursday? You didn't do anything fancy. You just did the whole job, in order, all the way to the end, including the boring parts, and you did the boring parts exactly the same as the interesting ones. That's the job. No, ma'am, Pike said. That's the rare part. Everybody can do the interesting parts. He looked at her sideways. That's all it ever was, in that quarry. You didn't do a miracle. You did all of it in order while it was happening, and there was nobody else on this whole plateau who could keep doing it in order once it got loud. He put his glasses on. That's what I couldn't say in March, he said. Took me 5 months to find the words, and they're not even good ones. They're good ones, she said. 14 months later, on the 7th of August, Nora Calder was standing in her sister's driveway in Burns, Oregon, at 10 minutes to 6 in the morning, leaning on the fender of a rented pickup with 2 sleeping bags in the bed and a cooler and a case of water and a coffee for a 19-year-old who came out the front door at 6 on the dot with his boots untied. They got to Rock Creek by 9. The cottonwood was still there and about 40 feet taller than the photograph. Owen caught 4 fish and kept none of them and talked, for 2 days, more than she had ever heard him talk in his life, about the welding program, which had started in June, and about a girl named Shay, and about a guy at the tire shop who could put a truck tire on a rim in under a minute, which he described as though it were a religious event. On the second night, lying on their backs under the Perseids, he said, So, are you going to do this next year? August 7th, Nora said. Same driveway, same time. Okay, he said, and that was all, and it was the sound of something being put back. They stopped at her mother's on the way home. Verna Ryland was 71 and running 1,100 acres with 2 hired men and a bad hip, and she came out onto the porch and hugged her daughter for exactly as long as she was willing to, and then let go and said, "You're thin." Emmett Hale's photograph was on Nora's phone by then, sent in June. A rock wall, dry stack, fieldstone, running the whole front of a lot outside Pueblo, finished corner to corner, and a woman in a sun hat standing at the near end of it with one hand up like she'd been told to move and wasn't going to. Emmett had gotten out in March. He was doing masonry in Colorado Springs and had more work than he could take and had already told her twice that his mother had a room made up. And Roy Latimer, who had gone to the marksmanship school as an operations sergeant and hated the paperwork and loved the rest of it, sent a message twice a month with no punctuation and no capitals, and had recently sent one that said they want somebody to come talk to a class about the quarry, and I told them to ask you because I'd get it wrong. On the last day, coming back from her mother's over the pass, they came around a curve, and there was a minivan on the shoulder with its hood up and steam standing straight out of it in a white column, and a family standing in the sage, and Tom pulled in behind them. Nora got out. She was 6 steps from the front of that van when the smell came off it and hit her, sweet and hot, the syrup and scald smell of coolant boiling, and her body stopped being hers. She was on the tip of a rock spur 941 meters from a concrete wall watching a white plume stand up in still air, and her heart was going like a bird in a box, and there was grit in her teeth. "Nora, yeah." "Go sit in the truck," Tom said, not looking at her, already rolling his sleeves. "I got it." She went and sat in the truck with the door open and her boots on the gravel and made herself count things. Fence posts, 4, hawks, 1. Miles to bend, 31. After a while, a little of it let go. Tom got the family's van running well enough to limp to Sisters, and came back and got in and started the engine and didn't say one word about it, and they drove for 11 miles before she spoke. "Sammy's still running that drill," she said. "The rig. The company put a radiator and a charge cooler in it, and it went back to work in 9 days. 9 days, he whistled. He wrote to me. He said, 'Tell her the machine forgives her.'" Tom laughed. Then, after a minute, "You could have killed it, you know. Easy shot by comparison. Fuel, block, anything. Then it dies across the door, and they're in that room until dark, and there's no door," Nora said. She had her hand out the window, riding the air. "You don't have to kill a thing to stop it. That's the whole trick. My mother's been telling me that since I was 19, and I thought she was talking about a well pump." In the spring, on her second rotation, she rode out to Quarry 6 at first light with the gravel run. The road was finished by then. Route Copper went 140 kilometers from the airfield to the district center on a hard black surface with painted lines, and the gravel that was under all of it had come out of that hole in the ground, and it was still coming out because they were building the spur north now. She got out at the gate and walked in while the trucks lined up. The bowl was the same, stepped in gray and orange, already shimmering at 7 in the morning. The magazine stood under the north face with a steel plate bolted over a patched circle at chest height on the north wall, and around the patch the concrete was still pocked from a bit that never got all the way through. Down on the second bench, Sammy had the drill working. It hammered away at the face, and the sound came up the bowl the same as it always had. And after a while, at the hour he always did it, he shut it down and swung open the side panel and propped it with a length of rebar and put a hose over the cores, and the steam came up off it and went away. Nobody on that floor knew who she was. There was a whole new engineer element in country, and 200 people at Camp Harlow who had never heard of any of it, and a road crew from 3 villages who called her the ammunition lady because she checked their blasting stores on Tuesdays. She stood there a minute and let the machine noise wash over the pit, and she thought about 9 people, about a wall in Colorado made of stone off their own ground, about a cottonwood over a creek in August, about a bearing held up to the light like a monocle in 110 degrees 90 miles from the nearest parts counter. Then a driver leaned on his horn because the line was moving, and Nora Calder put her hand up to say she was coming and walked back across the floor of Quarry 6 into the day's work with her eyes level and her stride easy, while behind her, the machine she had chosen not to kill came back to life, coughed once, took hold of the rock, and kept building the road.